All right, so diving in today, we're going to be talking all about the Pixel 10 series, Google's next big phone launch, hopefully. We're looking at some leaked CAD renders and trying to figure out what they mean for the direction Google is heading in with their flagships.
Yeah, you got it. So this is kind of a sneak peek, right? Based on these digital blueprints from Android headlines and the always reliable on leaks, these CAD renders, they basically give us a pretty good idea of what these phones might end up looking like, even though they aren't out yet.
Exactly. And, we're all about getting smart on things quickly here. So what should our listeners really be zeroing in on with these leaks? What are the big things to watch for, especially if they're thinking about maybe upgrading their phone later this year?
Well, first off, the Pixel 10, the Pixel 10 Pro, and the Pixel 10 Pro XL are all going to be part of this deep dive. And right off the bat, one thing that really jumps out is that Google seems to be sticking pretty close to what they did with the Pixel 9 series when it comes to the overall design.
Oh, interesting. So if you're someone who likes the way the current Pixels look and feel, you're probably going to be pretty happy with what you're seeing so far with the Pixel 10 series.
Yeah, definitely a sense of continuity there. Now, when we get into the nitty-gritty of the actual dimensions, the reports are saying that all three of these new models are going to be really similar in size to the phones that came before them. Like, for instance, the standard Pixel 10 is rumored to be about 152.8 millimeters by 72 millimeters by 8.6 millimeters.
Okay, so I'm pulling up the specs for the Pixel 9 right now just to compare. And it looks like the Pixel 9 was just a hair thinner, like 0.1 millimeters thinner.
Right, exactly. And I know zero point 0.1 millimeters, it doesn't sound like a lot, but, sometimes those little tiny differences can actually be noticeable when you're holding the phone in your hand, especially if there are other changes to the design that affect the grip and all that.
Yeah, for sure. Little things add up. Okay, so the standard Pixel 10, maybe a tiny bit thicker. What about the Pixel 10 Pro?
So the Pixel 10 Pro, they're saying it's also probably going to measure around 152.8 by 72 by 8.6 millimeters. So again, maybe just a smidge thicker than the Pixel 9 Pro,
Yeah.
but not a radical change by any means.
Gotcha. So both the standard and the Pro model, potentially a tiny bit thicker than their predecessors. What about the big guy, the Pixel 10 Pro XL?
All right, so this is where it gets interesting. The Pixel 10 Pro XL, it's supposedly going to come in at 162.7 millimeters by 76.6 millimeters by 8.5 millimeters. And what's kind of cool about this is that it's actually a tiny, tiny bit shorter than the Pixel 9 Pro XL by about zero point 0.1 millimeters. So again, we're talking really small tweaks here, nothing too drastic when it comes to the overall size and shape of these phones.
Okay, so subtle changes across the board when it comes to dimensions. Now let's talk about the screens. Any big surprises there, or are we looking at pretty standard sizes?
Based on what we're seeing, it looks like the Pixel 10 and the Pixel 10 Pro are both going to have 6.3-inch screens.
Uh-huh. That makes sense. Matches up with the previous generation.
Yeah. Sticking with what works, it seems. And the Pixel 10 Pro XL, they're saying it's likely going to keep that same big 6.8-inch screen that the Pixel 9 Pro XL had.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in terms of actual screen size, it seems like things are staying pretty consistent.
Right. So no need to adjust your expectations there.
But I do remember that with the Pixel 9 series, there was a difference in the actual display quality between the standard and the Pro models. Is that something we might see again this time around?
Yeah, you're bringing up a good point.
So there is still some uncertainty about whether Google is going to use different resolution panels or even different display technologies between the standard Pixel 10 and the Pixel 10 Pro.
Right.
It's something to watch for because, as you said, with the Pixel 9 series, they did have some variations in that area. So just because the screen sizes are the same doesn't necessarily mean the viewing experience will be identical. We'll have to wait and see what the final specs are.
Right. Good reminder, especially for our listeners who are super picky about their screens, which, let's be honest, is a lot of us these days. All right, so we've talked about the overall look, we've talked about size, we've talked about screens. Now let's move on to what is possibly the most exciting part of any new phone launch: the camera. What are we seeing in these leaks about the Pixel 10 series camera setup?
This is where it gets really interesting, especially for the standard Pixel 10. It seems like Google might be giving the base model a third camera lens for the first time ever.
Whoa, hold on, a third lens on the standard Pixel 10? That would be huge. What kind of lens are we talking about?
Okay, so from what we can see in the renders, it looks like Google is adding a telephoto periscope sensor to the standard Pixel 10. And if that's true, it would be a pretty big deal, especially for folks who are thinking about getting the base model instead of one of the Pros.
Yeah, that would definitely be a step up. Can you explain a little bit about what a telephoto periscope lens does for our listeners who might not be familiar with all the camera tech jargon?
Sure. Basically, a periscope lens uses a system of mirrors inside the phone to bend the light that comes in.
Hmm.
And this lets you have a much longer optical zoom without having to make the phone super thick or having a camera bump that sticks out a mile. So think of it kind of like a periscope on a submarine, right? You can see things that are far away without having to stick your whole head out of the water.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so a potential periscope lens on the standard Pixel 10. And to give everyone some context, the current Pixel 9 has two cameras, a main 50 megapixel camera and a 48 megapixel ultra wide lens. And then the Pixel 9 Pro and the Pro XL, they both have three cameras, that same 50 megapixel main camera, the 48 megapixel ultra wide, and then an extra 48 megapixel telephoto lens. So yeah, if the base model is jumping up to a triple lens system and it looks like a pretty advanced zoom lens at that, that's a pretty big deal.
Absolutely. It really makes you wonder if Google is trying to make having a really great camera a standard feature across all of their Pixel phones, not just the more expensive models. For a long time, having a good optical zoom has been one of the things that sets the more expensive phones apart from the rest. So if Google is putting a periscope lens on the standard Pixel 10, it could be a sign that they see camera technology as one of the most important things for smartphones going forward. Maybe that's what they're going to focus on to compete with other phone makers.
Really interesting stuff to think about. Okay, so beyond the cameras, are there any other design details that are worth mentioning based on these leaks?
One thing that stands out is the material that they might be using for the middle frame of the phones.
Hmm.
The Pixel 10 Pro and the Pixel 10 Pro XL, it looks like they might have a glossy finish on the frame, whereas the standard Pixel 10 might have a matte finish.
Oh, interesting. So that could definitely change how the phones feel in your hand, right? Some people really like that smooth, shiny look of a glossy phone, but others prefer the grip and the less noticeable fingerprints that you get with a matte finish. It's a small detail, but it shows that Google is still paying attention to those little things that can make a difference in the user experience.
Exactly. It's all about giving people options and finding what works best for them. And it's those little details that can sometimes make a phone feel really premium and well designed.
Okay, so just to do a quick recap before we move on, here's what we know so far. It looks like the Pixel 10 series is going to keep the same basic design language as the Pixel 9 series, with just a few small tweaks here and there. The dimensions are going to be very similar, the screen sizes are staying the same, and the biggest change we're seeing is the potential addition of a third camera lens, specifically a periscope telephoto lens, on the standard Pixel 10. And then there's that possible difference in the frame material with glossy finishes for the Pro models and maybe a matte finish for the standard model. Now, the big question is, when can we actually expect to see these phones?
Well, everything points to a launch sometime later this year, which would be right in line with Google's usual schedule for releasing new Pixel phones. They usually do it in the fall, so we probably still have a few months to wait before they make any official announcements. But these early leaks definitely give us a lot to be excited about.
Totally. Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive into the Pixel 10 series leaks, what's the main thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this information?
I think the big takeaway is that even though it doesn't seem like Google is completely reinventing the wheel with the Pixel 10 series, the possibility of that third camera, especially a periscope lens, coming to the standard Pixel 10 could mean that Google is serious about making really great camera features available to everyone, not just people who buy the most expensive phones. It could be a big shift in their strategy, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And of course, it's always important to remember that these are just leaks. So the final products that Google releases might be a little bit different from what we're seeing here. But it's still fun to speculate, and these leaks definitely give us some good insights into what Google might be thinking.
Couldn't agree more. And, this whole thing about the camera upgrade, it really raises some interesting questions for me. Like, what does it mean for the future of smartphone photography if more and more phone makers start offering these really advanced features on their less expensive models? What kind of impact will that have on how we use our phones and what we expect from them? I think it's something for all of us to think about as we watch the smartphone world continue to evolve.
Totally agree. It's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more tech insights and analysis, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.